Thank you, friends. Welcome to our newest members. That is very exciting. We've been host to the National Universalist Convocation this weekend. And if you did not know that, please read the newsletters in the future. We forgive ourselves and each other, and we begin again in love. And it's been a wonderful experience, I think, to hear from Dr. Dan McCannon from Harvard Divinity School yesterday, who preached on some of the characters from this congregation's history, their connections to universalism as a theology back then, and to think about what universalism for us today is. So if you're not familiar, right, the classical definition of Christian universalism especially was the belief that the Christian God was too good and too loving to condemn anyone to hell. Did not believe in a literal hell somewhere like below the ground, right? They would talk about man could create hell on earth. They often use the language of man. But that was their message. And it was a really enticing message. The Universalists were one of the fastest growing denominations here in America until the American Civil War, when they looked around and really started to reckon with the kind of pain and suffering and carnage that men, and I will be intentional here and say men, can inflict upon one another. And to look at the horrors of American chattel slavery and wonder, why is God not doing anything about this? Someone has to pay. There has to be some kind of justice. That's where the Restorationist stepped in, where the church gets one of its original names. The Restorationists said, yeah, everyone goes to heaven eventually, but if you were really bad, you got to spend some time in the penalty box. There's got to be some kind of purification or restoration of the soul that didn't often take very long, and it could only take up to 10,000 years. That was the maximum penalty that someone would pay. But that eventually everyone was restored, all human souls, and that process was continuous and it was unstoppable. That there was nothing a soul could do to be prevented from ultimately being reconciled or restored to that all-encompassing love. There was disagreement around that, as I'm sure you can imagine. And Dr. McCannon talked about the first minister here who was a restorationist. He talked about his journey of going from a very progressive universalist minister to becoming very reactionary, a pro-Confederate newspaper editor, and someone who attacked some of the heroes of progressive and liberal faith movements with vicious racist attacks. And to see how someone could start in one place and end in another, the message was about the role that class resentment and disaffection and the looking around at all the suffering in the world and wondering, why doesn't God do anything about this? Someone has to pay. That anger, when unchecked and untransformed, can send you into different places, even if you start somewhere like here. For our break time, we took a walk down to the Wissahickon because Dr. McCannon was very interested in this special character, George Lepard, who was a member, maybe not a member, but a friend of this congregation back in the 1840s, and he had a very mystical religious sense in general, but he felt very connected to the Wissahickon. And so Dan wanted to go and see the Wissahickon. I said, well, it's not just one place. It's actually kind of big. Is there any place in particular that you want to go? He's like, I don't know. Maybe to the water, I guess. I'm like, well, all right, no problem, we can do that. Then it rained, so it was muddy. And I said, are you sure you still want to go? We might slip and fall, I don't know what might happen. You're wearing your Harvard Divinity School professor shoes. Are you sure this is okay? He said, yeah. So we started out walking, And I have been in the Wissahickon plenty of times, at least a few times. I've never done this specific trip, but I know where the water is. And I know that if you keep going, you eventually get there. But I'm conscious of the time, and I'm conscious of his shoes, and conscious that he's a Harvard Divinity School professor, and I don't want to cast aspersions, but I don't know how much hiking in the Wissahickon he's done before. And so we're going down and stepping over rocks, and my shoes are getting wet, and so I know his shoes are getting wet and a little bit muddy. And we're going, and we're passing people who are coming up, and they're wearing their hiking gear, clearly more ready for this than we are. And I start to feel a little nervous. And we come out by where the stables are in the Wissahickon, if you know where that is. And it's beautiful, and I was like, oh, good, it's flat ground. I did not anticipate the weeds being thicker and wet. So we are covered in water by the time we get across this stable area. But we got to see horses, and that made him happy. And I kept saying, okay, we're almost there. We're almost there. It's just a little bit further. There's a little turn that we got to make, and then we'll be right where we want to be. Okay. So we're going. He's checking his watch. I'm thinking, ooh, this is going to be close. We go, and we find a good path that's nice and wide, and we walk down it, and we turn, and I can hear the water. Okay, we're definitely almost there. And we go, and we find a little split in the path that walks down, and we can walk. You have to step over a big log. And we come down to the water. And where before you could hear the sounds of Wissahickon Avenue, or maybe the drive, you could hear other people walking through. When we got into the water, it was completely still. And the joy on his face, because you could see it click, that, yeah, I could see how someone could make a connection here. So we took this path, not really knowing where we were going, getting a little bit muddy, a little bit wet on the way, it was a little messy. A little bit of resentment I could tell was starting to boil up. But when we made it there, all of that flowed away. It was transformed. It was to be in this special, sacred, holy place. When I think about what is going on with our country, with our UUA denomination, and sometimes with our congregation, and sometimes with our family, we're on a path that we don't exactly know where we're going, right? Sometimes it feels like we're walking downhill and things are accelerating more and more quickly, and we're worried that we're going to slip and fall in the mud, and then what are we going to do? We might feel like our shoes are not ready for the journey, like we're not appropriately outfitted or equipped to deal with all of this. We might have a little bit of resentment towards our leaders or perhaps our minister. This guy doesn't know where in the hell he's going. It's all valid. The message of the Universalist Convocation, the historical message of universalism, and I think what Dr. McCannon was speaking about, what we often speak about, is that the centrality of love is part of that destination. And that when you get there, you know you're there, because the love is all abiding, all encompassing. But how you get there and who you get there with, that is the harder part. And it's not enough to just say love, perhaps with a lowercase l. That there is a spiritual element to when we talk about love. Not just talking about greeting cards and nice flowers, which are all things I love, but something bigger, something greater. Dr. Buchanan used the phrase, the greatest idea anyone has ever had, the biggest thought a human being could have. Love that is so encompassing, and all-powerful, it is transformative. It is transformative. When we were walking down into the valley, if I had turned and said, hey, don't worry, this is just the transformative part of the trip, that might not have been received well. Some of us don't like to be told that we're being transformed or that we need to be transformed. Sometimes it is hard to hear you need to be forgiven. Sometimes it's hard to hear that we are imperfect. And down by the water's edge, in the greenness of the Wissahickon, surrounded by love, all of that goes away. When we tell the story of this country, some people don't want to hear the parts that make them uncomfortable. Some don't want to hear the parts that demand some kind of justice or accountability. Sometimes it's easier to not look around and wonder, hey, somebody's got to pay for this. Because the answer might be us. If God is not going to do something about it, the Universalist said, we do. We have to do something about it. To not just negate hell on earth, but to try and create heaven on earth as well. But when you are covered in mud and your shoes are slippy and you don't know where you're going, sometimes a hard message to hear that, oh, by the way, you are also responsible for fixing all of this, or at least helping to fix all of this. And it's so very easy to fall into that trap of saying, well, that's not my problem. That is not my concern. I can't fix it alone, so I don't have to do anything about it. Because I'm just one person. I'm a human being. I'm fallible. I'm imperfect. And all of that is true. And you're not supposed to do it alone. And at the end of a road is this love that is all-encompassing and all-powerful. And it is calling to us, is what I think the Universalist message says. It is calling to us not just to come and be transformed for ourselves, but to come and help transform everything else too. So that the love is not just down by the water of the Wissahickon, that the love with a capital L is everywhere, can be felt everywhere, can be seen everywhere. And if we don't preach that, and we don't act on that, as Reverend Liz McMaster once said, why would anyone want to join an organization that does not preach that message? Why would anyone want to join an organization that is only internally focused and only concerned with their own safety and survival? And when you are on the path and it feels muddy and you're covered in water and you don't feel like you're equipped for this and you're just really trying to survive, might be literally trying to survive, to be told that you're not here just for safety and survival can be hard to hear. And there is that love that is bigger, that is more, that is calling to us, wanting to work with us, that will empower us, not just to say that we center love, but to act like it. To transform that anger and resentment that so many people feel when they feel guilt and shame over all the problems in the world. We could try and debate these people, try and give them facts and figures about the reality of systemic racism, try and persuade them with arguments that ours is the right side to be on, this is the best way to live, and they will come back with their own either alternate facts or their own set of facts. Hello. Because their mind is made up in a different way. In the same way as the minister who started here when it was Restoration and ended up as a neo-Confederate sympathizer. It is the acts of love that will transform us. And it's not just speaking about it. It is doing these small acts, the small truths that are all around, that we each have a piece of, that we bring with us, and we can show one another, you are loved, and so are they. And so am I. And so are you. You're loved. You are loved. And not like in a small L capital way, like in a big L capital way, like loved more than you could ever possibly imagine. The biggest human thought that could ever be conceived is telling you that you are beloved, that you are called to this, that you're ready to be transformed and to help transform the world. So when we're on the path and we feel like we're not equipped for this, we feel like we're not ready, we feel like we're just trying to survive, or we're plagued with thoughts of shame or guilt or doubt, saying, I'm not responsible for that. I can't be responsible for that. You're not meant to do it alone. But we are meant to do it. We're not meant to do it all at once, but we are meant to do it. We can hear the water. We don't quite know where the path is, but if we keep going, if we keep acting with love, if we keep centering love, big love, capital L love, we will find that place, whether that's at the Wissahickon, here in this building, somewhere else in your personal lives, we will find that place that transforms those feelings of anger or doubt or guilt, that washes them away. That's what it means to be Universalist to me. And the comforting thing is, the promise is that I'm not alone, and that I'm called to do it, and that I will be transformed throughout it. May that be so. Amen. Amen.
Now is the time when we collect our offering of financial resources for the good of this beloved community.